It's really an honor of mine to introduce Frances Moore Lappé. She has traveled here from Boston. As we all know, she is literally a legend in the food movement. And she, ironically, when I talked to George about Frances, she being at the event, he said he knocked on her door in 1978 and met with Frances Moore Lappé. So I just want to say that we're really in the room of legends and really people that have stood up and heroes that have fought for farmers for 40 and 50 years. Frances Moore Lappé really needs no introduction. She's the author of A Diet for a New Planet. Diet for a Small Planet. It came out in 1971. She's also the co-founder of the Oakland-based food think tank called Food First. She also has started the Small Planet Institute with her daughter, Anna Lappé. And Anna is another amazing author who wrote Diet for a Hot Planet, and is another leading light here in the fight against climate change and linking the problems between food, agricultural production, and how farmers can transform our soil and agricultural practices into a better way. So listen, I'm very excited to introduce Frances Moore Lappé. She's, again, the author of 19 books, Diet for a Small Planet, and most recently, Daring Democracy. You should all, I've been reading it in the last month. You should all get a copy of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so very, very much. I have learned a great deal, taken notes all morning. I want to thank Kiss the Ground and all the farmers here. I want to thank Dave Murphy. I want to thank Annabelle Park and many, many others. I feel privileged. Deep breath. To be, yes, here with you in this moment, but also just to be alive in this moment. It is a very, very special moment for humanity and for our Earth. I believe it is so special because change is possible. I say that because we are in the midst of the biggest storm in my now long life. And sometimes, in a fierce storm, even the biggest tree will fall. And you know what? You can see the roots for the first time. And that's why, in my best moments, I'm so happy to be alive right now, where we can see these roots of this perfect storm. And so I see three storm fronts here at home. One, our dangerously damaged democracy. Second, our breathtakingly shocking economic inequality. And third, our existential climate crisis. Now, just to get this storm's magnitude in perspective, did you know that our democracy, which has been the pride of the world that we thought, did you know that scholars at Harvard and University of Sydney in Australia, with teams all over the world, they have concluded that the US now ranks below 55 other countries in the world in electoral integrity. On economic inequity, ours now is more extreme than in 111 countries in the world. And on climate, a lot of us know it's China and the US who are the major climate culprits. So that's the storm. That's the storm, and its three fronts as I think of it. But as I've said, I think shock can be a good thing. It can motivate us. It can motivate us to dig more deeply than we've ever done. And certainly people here today, both metaphorically and symbolically, are doing that. And so I'm so proud to be here with you. We must go to the roots then and grab them. And where I start, at a pretty basic place. So in some ways, I'm sharing with you my 50 years of asking why? And for me, I begin with who are we? Who are human beings anyway? And what do we need to thrive? And what are the social conditions that have proven through our long social evolution to bring out the best or the worst in us? And so here are so far, my answers that I'll share very simply. Who are we? We are creatures with great potential, enormous potential for both good and evil. And what shows up is largely dependent upon what the conditions are that we ourselves create or tolerate. And very important also, and I'll come back to this in a moment, that we are creatures of the mind, so that our belief systems that they determine which aspects of us show up, right? So my next question, what do we need to thrive? Again, 3. We need a sense of agency, that we count, that we have some power in shaping our future. Second, I believe that humanity, each of us, we need meaning or purpose in our lives beyond our own survival. And third, that we need connection with others in common purpose. That these needs run so deep for almost all of us that, of course, people have been known to give their lives in seeking them, in feeling that it was the only way. So together, these 3 needs, when they are met, what do they add up to? I believe they add up to human dignity. Dignity, and only democracy can achieve and protect dignity. And if unmet, what happens? If those needs are unmet, we are left open to demagogues who will try to fill that void. We try to fill that void through their promises. So my next question, specifically, what are the conditions that make democracy and thus human dignity possible? What are the social conditions? Well, you'll see I love trilogies because here's another one. Okay, 3 things. The wide dispersion of social power, economic and political. 2, transparency in public relations. And 3, a culture not of blaming, but a culture of mutual accountability, I call it. I love the phrases of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Some are guilty, but we're all responsible. Now, what are the conditions that have proven to deny democracy and thus dignity, and to bring out the worst in us, to bring out our ugliest potential? Well, of course, they are the opposite of those positive conditions. They are concentrated, unaccountable power. In fact, scientists now tell us that as some gain power over others, the powerful actually, they can look in their brain patterns and see empathy diminish. And of course, concentrated power means fewer people making decisions, and therefore the decisions aren't as wise. The second condition, beyond concentrated power, is secrecy in public affairs. Of course, we all can cite examples, but one I love to hate, is before the great meltdown that brought us the Great Recession, the bankers who were pushing off these illegitimate investments as sound ones, their slogan was, IBG, YBG, I'll be gone, you'll be gone. They knew they'd be out of there with their millions before the rest of us caught on, and they were right. So secrecy, we don't do well. So third, cultures of blame. This third condition. Now, these 3 negative conditions are precisely, unfortunately, what our culture is now constructing. And I think this may particularly, condition 1, could be true for farmers, which I consider to be the world's most important profession. The first negative of concentrated, unaccountable power. And so I want to focus on that. How and where are we creating these conditions that bring out the worst in us? And believe me, I shift gears to the positive. I only have time to focus, as I say, on that first condition, concentrated power. I think of it as a corrupting nexus of power that includes both political and economic. Let me start with the political. We call ours a democracy, supposed to mean that citizens are in charge, but as many have mentioned, we know that increasingly money speaks louder than we do. For example, a popular view, a common view, is that that decision, Citizens United, that Supreme Court decision, opened the floodgates to political spending, but we have to recognize that long before Citizens United decision, over 3 decades, spending in congressional campaigns doubled in the Senate and tripled for House seats. In other words, a major problem. Citizens United did, though, change something really big and important. Power shifted massively toward secretive, and that is one of the conditions, of course, that I'm arguing brings out the worst in us. It shifted spending power to big super PACs and dark money. And in food and agriculture, from 2001 to 2017, agribusiness lobbying expenditures jumped 75%. Now, agribusiness lobbying is greater than that spent by the defense industry. And agribusiness political contributions, over a recent 8-year period, they nearly doubled. So the result is what I've come to call privately held government. That means the top 1% of donors make 71% in political contributions. So it's little wonder then that political scientists find that the relationship, the correlation between what citizens want and what actually passes in Washington is near zero. Whereas for the elite group, it is a strong correlation between their interests and desires and what passes in Washington. So back to agriculture, just to give one example. I was just reading about Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue, who himself, he has been fined for ethics violations and has long ties to big ag, and he appointed as Undersecretary for Research Scott Hutchins, who directed, guess what, global pesticide R&D for Dow AgroSciences. Such private corporate influence is an equal opportunity corrupter. President Obama welcomed, of course, as many of you know, Monsanto representatives into high posts in important agencies. But one thing I just learned recently, I guess I learned it when I was writing my last World Hunger book that kind of broke my heart, that during the Obama era, that WikiLeaks released 900 secret cables that had come through the Obama State Department that were a diplomatic campaign to break down barriers to GMO products around the world, from Africa to Nicaragua to Vietnam. That was through our diplomacy. So of course, concentrated political power enables concentrated economic power, as we see in these examples. As you know, and as George pointed to, ag policy from the Great Depression and the period following, that ag policy at that time was meant to ensure parity, as George explained to us, and via price support and supply management, by the 1980s, this approach had started eroding with the rise of what I call market fundamentalism. We moved to today's systems of subsidies with no price supports. So of course there's overproduction and falling prices. So I'm going to take advantage of this moment to share this book I love, Eating Tomorrow by Timothy Wise. He's a colleague of mine at Small Planet Institute. It lays all this out for us, among other things. And he writes that agribusiness in the 60s and 70s became more powerful than farm groups and took over the farm lobby, in effect. Priorities changed from farmers getting decent prices to unrestrained production, as we've been hearing all morning, so I won't continue on that. And actually, supply management, Tim says, was officially outlawed. As a result, agricultural economic power is ever more concentrated, as was laid out brilliantly by the earlier speakers. So I think I don't have to make that case. So let me jump over that. But I also wanted to add something I hadn't heard this morning, and that is that another burden, according to a recent study, is that our systems, of course, means that the artificially cheap commodities get turned into highly processed foods with very little nutrition. And so that, according to this new report, the American diet itself now costs us an additional $50 billion a year in healthcare costs. So concentrated power of this kind could make us feel powerless. But over the years, I've come to believe that for our species, it is not the magnitude of a challenge that crushes the human spirit. Because over our long evolution, we have stood up against incredible odds and succeeded. That it is this feeling of powerlessness that crushes us, and that's what we have to address right now for each of us in this moment. And so what is required then to know our power? We must dig even deeper than I've gone, because in many ways what I've been laying out here is still this concentrated economic and political power is still a symptom. If we're going to grasp, if we're going to make this turn toward life, I want to add another piece, and it is the power of ideas. That we humans are creatures of the mind, and our mindset, the set of beliefs we hold, act like blinders. I love to quote here, no other than Albert Einstein, who said, "It is theory which decides what we can observe." So our belief systems act, and literally so that we can't see what we don't believe is possible, or we don't want to see, we can't see. So I want to lay out, without, I hope, sounding like this is a conspiratorial theory of a few, but I want to point out that the mindset that now has been taking us down as we've been hearing these consequences, that it was one that was deliberately cultivated in response precisely to the New Deal and the sense of what progress we were making, because between my birth in 1944 and my children's birth in the early 70s, actually every income group gained and the poorest gained the most. And that was very threatening to those who wanted it to be as it has been since, with wealth rushing to the top. So there was a feeling of threat. And so the Chamber of Commerce in 1970 commissioned a corporate lawyer, he was then on the board of Philip Morris, to write a secret blueprint, or at least they didn't, it was stamped confidential, and but it was all about how to protect what they called free market enterprise, that the Chamber saw under deadly attack. And this lawyer wrote that, yes, indeed, the free market enterprise system is in deep trouble and the hour is late. It was really scary. They were really scared. So the Chamber then began to push a narrative that, in fact, this belief that government could serve the common good was really dangerous, and that we had to leave our fate to this unfettered free enterprise system. And so this blueprint then was spread widely, that we had to instill this idea that the market, this free market enterprise without government, no, that's bad, would really save us. And that was from grade school to grad school, from think tanks to the media, powerfully effective. And I like to remind myself that, of course, this notion of a free market, that term, is itself misleading, because there is no such thing, because every market has rules. And our current rule is pretty much do what brings highest return to existing wealth. And that is the organizing principle. So wealth accrues to wealth, so much so that since the Powell memo, this, I'm just referring to this blueprint for how do we put forward this narrative, the income of the top 1% has grown 100 times faster than the bottom 50% of Americans. So this government-bad, market-good mindset easily really took hold, though, in the Reagan years, that he said famously that government is not the solution, it's the problem. And he touted, quote, the magic of the marketplace. And I understand there were even in the Reagan White House, people wore Adam Smith neckties because his ideas were reduced to this simplistic notion. Actually, he was a profound thinker who had a very different view of human nature, but that's another speech. So once absorbing this narrative over the decades, we could say that Americans have not been able to stay true to our own Constitution. The preamble to our Constitution mandates that our nation serves to promote the general welfare. That's all of us, the general welfare. And so our Constitution requires us to act now to do that. And so we are called by our founding vision then to dissolve this dangerous anti-government mindset and replace the anti-democratic nexus of power, both economic and political, that is so tightly held. And so how do we move forward in this, I believe, live or die moment? We keep focused on solutions because despair is our only real enemy at this moment. So how do we keep focused on solutions? Well, we certainly take heart, and one of the things I've loved is learning, as I was invited to give this talk, learning about so many organizations that now I want to go deeper into learning from, including, of course, George, who just spoke, but Food Democracy Now! And Practical Farmers of Iowa and the Savannah Institute, goes on and on, Women, Food, and Agriculture Network, Family Farm Defenders, all of you. But we can gain confidence also, I believe, by looking around the world and seeing what other human beings are doing and realizing that we are not alone on this path. So one example is the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh that used to be called the pesticide capital of the world. With a lot of effort on the part of the government and leadership from farmers, they reduced pesticides by half in 6 years. The governments of Denmark and Austria now stepping up with real investments in what we now call regenerative farming and not making people pay for any kind of organic certification and providing help in actually marketing and promoting this move to regenerative agriculture. Or Mexico. How many of us know that early last year the government allocated almost $800 million to agroforestry? This is a form of ecological or regenerative agriculture, agroforestry jumpstart, called Planting Life Program, to reach almost 250,000 farmers whose incomes fall below the line of rural well-being. It will cover 1.4 million acres. And each of these family farms involved will get about $260 monthly, plus plants and tools and training. So that's Mexico. But maybe my most moving, to me anyway, example of what's happening that more of us should know about, it's from West Africa, of all places, because we think of that is where most hunger is today. And in just a few decades, in 11 countries, including government support and changing some laws to make this happen, agroforestry, again, a type of regenerative agriculture, has spread to almost 60 million acres of before barren land, with poor farmers in the lead. And so 17 million of those acres are Niger, which is the poorest country in the entire world. And food security for 3 million people has been secured by these farmers, this farmer-led program. So keeping in mind that we have allies around the world who can inspire us, what is called for us right now? That we have to believe that we can indeed fix our damaged democracy. It is foundational. All of us who are worried about the fate of farmers and farming in the planet, we can seize our power in this moment, no matter what our daily special passion is of all the people we've heard and each of you, whether it's climate crisis or helping farmers stay on their land, regenerative practices, whatever it is, we can act to ensure that our next president and our members of Congress believes and loves democracy and will go to the mat for us, and for that will be an anti-agribusiness trust buster, but also a trust builder instead of a blamer, a trust builder. We can insist that whoever we vote for is like that. I myself when I began to pick up the democracy fever in my life, and I couldn't put down my food and agricultural passions, a friend of mine looked me in the face and said, and I was trying to oh, how can I do this? This friend looked at me and said, Frankie, you know you can love 2 children at once. And I said, oh yeah, I got 2 kids, I can do this. So I'm asking us all to love more than 1 children at once, to know that we can, whatever we're doing, we can add our passion for democracy to it, and recognize that our democracy depends on it, and we depend on democracy. So we can stand with candidates who stand proudly with us in the values expressed today, who will support the public policies that you've been hearing about, and who will break farmers free from monopoly power, who will stand with those who will end private money influence over our political choices. And fortunately, right now, there's a powerful tool right there in Congress waiting for us to elect the people who will support it, a powerful tool by my personal democracy champion, John Sarbanes of Maryland. And he has authored with several hundred co-sponsors now, and passed something called the Democracy for the People Act. Passed the House. Passed the House with a unanimous vote, except for one of the Democrats, except for one who didn't vote. But it had full support from at least one side of the aisle. And it is the most important legislation for democracy, I would say, in half a century. It helps stop big money, PAC influence, big corporate money in politics. It brings transparency. Remember, that's one of the conditions that brings out the best in us. It would amplify small donor contributions, give citizens a chance, not just the big funders. It extends rules of conflict of interest to presidents and vice presidents, and it prohibits Congress from serving on corporate boards and it protects the right to vote, slows the revolving door between Congress and lobbying firms, and ends gerrymandering on a partisan basis. This is a comprehensive bill that John Sarbanes has developed called H.R. 1, Democracy for the People. So we can pass this legislation and vastly expand all that we have learned about here as we step up to fix our democracy, and to consciously build a unified movement across labor, across the environment, and this now movement of young people, the Sunrise Movement, a unified movement that understands that democracy is foundational. And already it's beginning. There's an organization called Democracy Initiative that these are people loving 2 children at once, right? Because they're people who have their issue, like Greenpeace or NAACP, Communications Workers of America. They all have their issues, but they've come together. There are now 72 organizations representing 45 million people who are standing for this deep, deep correction to our damaged democracy. They're working together. And there have been enormous victories, which most people don't realize, both in the midterms and the last year. I was counting somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen initiatives at the state and local level that are beginning to ensure that each citizen has an equal voice in our democracy. And so I've been delighted then to see in this movement building theme that in fact there is a movement growing of the Green New Deal as a embracing political change, and that I was delighted that this new coalition of U.S. farmers and ranchers for a Green New Deal involves 50 organizations representing about 10,000 farmers, and they went to the Capitol last September to make this case among the many of the points I'm making this morning. And I was heartened, as I've said, by the Sunrise Movement and its role in this Green New Deal coalition. So I want to end then with just some reflections on what I began about. It's not the magnitude of the challenge, it's our own power that is the key to all. And in this building this movement that can indeed bring us to be able to actually have a democracy that works to pass the policies we're hearing about today, that how do we do that? We go with our strongest messages. And it's not, oh, please come help us. That's not the strongest message. It's not so we're right, you're wrong. No. Our message and what I feel works with people so often is that join us. Just join us, because we have what everyone wants, a sense of meaning in our lives, a sense of connectedness to our own power and to one another. And so I think that as people sense the kind of eyes wide open hope that I heard from our speakers this morning, that we have a great deal to offer. And neuroscientists tell us that actually hope organizes our brains toward solutions. So we want to make sure that it's not, of course, a kind of Pollyanna sort of hope, but one based in the kind of concrete evidence that's been presented this morning. And I want to underscore that I don't think human beings need certainty of outcome or even high probability, that over our long history we've shown that we will step up. We will step up if there's any chance that we could be successful. And now that so much is at stake, I believe that even more than ever. And so we don't have to be optimists. We don't have to be optimists. What I'm saying is that as long as we see a sense of possibility, and I suggest that we keep a short list of things in our heads that have happened that we would never have believed could be possible until they happened. And so I call myself a possibilist, not an optimist. And all we have to do is know that in a world in which everything is changing moment to moment and we're all connected, then it is not possible to know what's possible, and therein lies our freedom. And so I want to say then again that our message is come on in to this movement for real democracy that meets our deepest human needs. Come on in. The water's good, and we have what you want, power, meaning, and connection. So I honor you, all of you who have gathered here today. I know that I sense that you might agree with me that maybe we're living in a moment when just being good citizens is not enough, but being courageous citizens is what's required. Courage is what's required. And so I feel that it is in this room. I certainly have heard it from everybody and seen it from all the people I've talked to here, that you are willing to do what you thought you could not do in such a moment. And I take tremendous joy in that, because I believe, as I felt it, the people here, that your courage is contagious, and I thank you for it. Thank you very much.